Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is DK Bhattacharya and I will be talking about Indus Valley Civilization. Indus Valley Civilization is the name given to a large number of excavations that yielded urban archaeology or urban settlement in India, combined India at that time from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. The excavations of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro was done by Marshall and Mackay, and from that time onward, large number of sites have been found all over Pakistan, Baluchistan, India, in India, Rajasthan and Gujarat. If you take the total area covered by Harappan sites, it goes from north in Ropar to south in Sutka Jindor and even to Daimabad in Maharashtra, and in the east up to western UP, and in the west up to Makran coast. So about 1 million square kilometer area. This development of urban culture is seen for the first time. It is so unique. We have urban cultures in Syria, in Sumeria, in Egypt, but then it is very interesting that this is the first time you find the development of urban culture dating to almost 3800 BC, where burnt bricks are used. You see, burnt brick is a novelty. Nowhere in Sumeria you find burnt brick. You find either mud brick or stones. And in this part of India, it is almost correct that if such a ton and ton of mud brick was baked and fired, that it is possible that whole of Punjab, the woods and the forests were cleared and it became an arid zone. Punjab had no water when India became independent. Punjab would have been a dried area unless, of course, Pratap Singh Kairo and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru brought the Satluj into canals into Punjab, and it became a wheat bowl of India. So it is believed that Harappans had annihilated the forest, the trees, to burn their bricks in tons. And these, for the first time, give a very interesting character to this urban settlement. Let us look at the important issue of Indus Valley civilization. It is a very big topic, and it can't be dealt in 30 minutes unless we just choose certain components of it. One of the components, for instance, is the urban center, the metropolis. If you look at the metropolis, and it's very interesting, all bricks, whether it is from Ropar or down from Sutka Jandor, all bricks are of the same size. That shows there is some centralized authority who are controlling the development structure. Even the urban planning seems to be the same all over in this 1 million square kilometer. That's the usual planning is of this kind. There are two mounds. There is one site where a third mound has also been found, and that is Dholabira in Kutch. So you have, and it is suspected that there may have been a fourth mound which has not yet been exposed. Generally, there are two mounds. And the number one mound, the higher mound, has an area where there is a lake and there are a number of rooms, and then this mound has been given the name the citadel, the center of power. Citadel is the higher mound. And the lower mound, which is a little far off in the west, usually is between the high mound and the lower mound, either a river flows or a branch of a river flows. And the lower mound, you have large number of habitation units, roads, and you have wells dug, you have drains made, and it seems to be a very planned urban settlement of villagers. You can't call them villages, of course, they're urban settlement. Now, this twin mount system was interpreted by Marshall to explain that the higher mount, the citadel, was the power center. And the power center, these people who is to stay in the higher mount, had by their side, almost adjoining to the citadel, is a huge granary, and a granary in which grains have been found. So it seems that the surplus of the agricultural produce was usurped by the power center. So the power center had the surplus as the base with which they could do trade from outside India. And we have evidence that trade used to be done with Yemen, Eden, and all those Kutch, areas in western Middle East. We have evidence of even seal coming from this part of western Middle East. But then these trades used to be done in a maritime way. We have no idea how these boats used to be, but we have one idea, that they used to carry bitumen, they used to collect bitumen and also export bitumen to the western Middle East. Now this bitumen is naturally occurring tar in those faucets from which the natural oil or gas comes out, and in the lip of those tars, lip of those holes, you find deposition of the tar, and this used to be collected by them, and this used to be exported. And we know, therefore, that the bitumen used to be used to seal the planks of wood. If you have two planks of wood and you put bitumen in between, then it becomes waterproof. So there must have been some activity, and strong activity, of boat building and taking the boat across the sea to the western part of Middle East. Now this proves one component of the dispersal of the power base, which is the granary. The granary is the part which is usurped from elsewhere where the food is grown. We have no sites, at least in the excavation of Marshall and Mackay, we have no sites where we knew how the food was produced. Food has been produced in a non-metropolitan site. It has to be a village. But the metropolitan site attracted so much attention for us that we started describing them, and we started looking at the material, because the first time 3800 BC to going up to 2700 BC, such an urban development of a uniform character was found that you immediately got attracted to it. There are many components which we'll talk about later on. But the important point is the producing base was a non-metropolitan site, and the non-metropolitan site must have been lying way apart from those urban centers where the produce has to be usurped, used to be brought in by the side of the citadel, used to be stored in the granary. In the granary, you find small rooms, and each of the room has independent stairs going down to the lake or bath. It is called the Great Bath. And the occurrence of these small independent stairs leading to the room upstairs and the bath below led the excavators conjecture that these people were priests, and they used to take bath and then do their meditation in the small rooms upstairs. Now this fixation with bath seems to have been something which the Westerners felt very much surprised about when they came to do excavation in this part. All the laborers, they used to be so fastidious about taking bath that even when it is very cold, they will dip themselves in water and mumble jumble something, Ram Ram or something, and they said, oh, this is the spiritual component of Indians. Now the Western scholars found this so much obsessive that they, even the interpretation of the archaeological material, they said they must be priests because they took bath. And they took bath and then went up to the small rooms which has no ventilation, so they must be doing meditation. Now this was a kind of concept that was floated by Marshall and Mackay, and it became very popular, and even in the textbooks we talk about it. It is true that there are two alabaster busts of a male figure which shows some indication of some spirituality. For instance, the man has a shawl which is on the right shoulder, and the shawl has trifoil designs, three loops. Trifoil design. The upper lip is shaved, the beard is there, and there is an amulet here with a circle and a band of hair, and the same amulet here. So this was taken as priest king. So he must be the king, and he's priest because his eyes are closed. So he must be always meditating. Now this is rather ridiculous, but the fact remains that this is the way the interpretation was done. Priest king. And you know, in the early Anglican church, also in England, the priest and the king used to be the dual power of the kingdoms. And a priest has to be present when a descendant of the royal king is being produced in the maternity room. And the priest has to seal the baby at once after it is born, that I have seen it being born in the descent of the kings. Because there was one midwife who seemed to have changed the baby. So the priest and king are very strong dual powers in the Church of England, and the same cognition seems to have been transported in India when they talked about this great bath and the number of rooms without ventilation. So, well, they must be the priest. And if they're the priest and they're also the king, they have kept the surplus in the granary. So the surplus in the granary is not inside the lower city, it is in the citadel. So this is the kind of story that came out as an interpretation of the urban structure. But we go to some, there is a site in Ganganagar district of Rajasthan called Kalibanga. Kalibanga is a site where we found a pre-Harappan layer. That means a layer in which, early Harappan, that is a layer in which there are furrows found, furrows of early farming that was done. So the plow evidence of pre-Harappan site before the metropolitan site developed, the urban site developed, is now evidenced from Kalibanga. So we have now more or less a continuous occupation from urban to semi-urban to village where the actual production took place. And we have large number of sites from Haryana, from Gujarat, where we have this actual production taking place and they are not urban. So we know that this material that was produced went to the urban site eventually as a power base. Now look at the components that has been found in the urban center. One of the most important things that has been found in the urban center is an excellent variety of pottery. It's a deluxe variety of pottery, and they are all um, uh, you know they have a kind of slipping done on top of it. Slipping is a technique. A pot is cleared and is completed on the wheel, and after it has been completed on the wheel, then you sort of allow it to rotate a few more rounds and you collect the fine material that accumulates in your hand. Now this fine material is called well levigated clay. This well levigated clay is then put on a stone and mixed with a color. It is mixed with a color, and this colored mud is allowed to be smeared on top of the last layer, and that is done in a very important technical way. Everybody can't do it. Now this is called slipping. Sometimes it is done by taking, like, let us say, like a matchbox, and collapse it, take that mud, give it a round and hold that colored mud on top of it like this. So there are some where a kind of a solution is made with the colored mud and the pot is dipped in it, so that the holes that is created on the outside of the mud after the pot is complete on the wheel, the hole is completely packed up with new mud, the colored mud. So you have a very shining surface. One of the most characteristic feature of Harappan ceramic technology is a tan chocolate colored slip. A slip which is chocolate color and very shining, all given all over the surface, but not inside. Sometimes the slipping is going up to the neck and the lip, but it doesn't go inside. So you know it is an external decoration. Now this is one of the classic fact of Harappan or Indus Valley ceramics. Second point, almost all these ceramics seems to have a kind of decoration which is dominated by 3 or 4 attributes: a people leaf, a scorpion, and a peacock. Peacock, people leaf, and scorpion are invariably painted with black color all over along the surface of the pottery. The second point about this Harappan ceramics is the occurrence of large number of deluxe ware. A deluxe ware is something which cannot be a storage ware, like a dish on stand, a bowl on stand. Now a stand is a solid or a hollow pillar on which the pottery is created or fixed. So, and it will have a base, which will be flat. Now this kind of a pottery cannot stay on a wooden floor or a mud floor. It has to get a floor which is to be flat, otherwise it will topple down. So they are called tableware or deluxe ware. Now the emergence of tableware and deluxe ware is a remarkable phenomena of Harappan pottery. They are also having very beautiful tan slips and the decoration with black color on top of it. They can be carinated and they can be rounded also. A third point, most of the Harappan pottery also includes a kind of elongated beaker which is not slipped, which is raw matted surface. There is no slipping on it, but they have numerous holes made all along the sides of the beaker. They are called perforated jars. Now perforated jar, of course, people try to comment. Some say they are essence essence jars where inside you'll put essence burning and the smoke will come out and there will be smell in the hole. Or sometimes one of the interpretations says they were buttermilk compressors. That means when milk is putrefied or milk is fermented, then you put it on those perforated jar, the milk comes out, and the cheese or whatever you call it will be compressed inside. So I don't know which one is correct, but it is true. And perforated jars are found also in pre-Harappan layers. This seems to be very characteristic of this region, Balochistan and the Pakistan region, where you find perforated jars of the same size, elongated beakers. This is the second Harappan characteristics. First is the urban settlement of twin mounds, and one mound being citadel, having the granary and the great bath and the number of rooms. And the second is for the city, having the covered and laid down drains and having rooms of various sizes. Some Japanese scholars have talked about internal stratification on the basis of size of the rooms of the lower mound of the common men's living quarters. There, some sizes are big rooms, some are small rooms, and they talked about some kind of social stratification. Some people were more important, some were less important, and the house shapes talk about the internal variation of characters. The third point, which is typical of Harappan, is a large number of terracotta figurines. Now, these terracotta figurines obviously are toys. They are grotesque, they are not finely finished, but they are large number of them. And even one of the terracotta figurine shows the possibility of having a wheel and a chart and a kind of wheel as a part of a chariot. Now this we can't prove because the wheels were separated, but then we can put them together and rejoin it and say, look, there was some kind of a cart or a chariot at that time, but we do not know any other evidence. There is no absolute evidence except the toy. So there is a very interesting component. Another interesting component of Harappan urban material culture is the large number of terracotta and stone blocks which are of different weight. So there are larger pieces of high weight, there are smaller pieces of lesser weight. So it seems they were weight for weighing material, and that shows indirectly some kind of activity and a strong accepted activity of redistribution of produce. So the produce has to be measured. I get you 3, you get 4, and so on and so forth. So this is a very important evidence that we have found. We have not found any measuring rod by which we can say that this kind of architecture was followed and they had a methodology for making structures. We have not. But we have found weights, and weights are a very important component of Harappan economy. And finally, in this whole lot of things that we find, the most surprising part is that the wastewater of the city is taken outside, and a soakage pit has been made. A pit has been made in which the wastewater goes and gets soaked into, and that soakage pit also is kind of made with kind of terracotta girds or terracotta rings all along the pit. Terracotta rings one above another has been put in such a way that rainwater doesn't wash the pit into a small mound and the pit continues to be in the same way. They're called ring wells. Now this is a very important evidence of municipality, arrangement of municipality, of handling the urban settlements immediate necessities of the villagers. Maybe 200 to 250 people were found in one or two of the urban settlements. 250 people have their own requirement of water, they have their own wastage of water, and there is activities around, and there has to be some kind of a common facility center that will provide them with the facility. And this was a remarkable evidence coming from 2800 BC or 3000 BC as an urban settlement. Finally, Indus Valley description will remain incomplete if we don't talk about the metal objects and the various kind of precious stones used as personal adornment like chains and armlets and so on. Now the metal objects are not very many. There are copper objects for the first phase, and the second phase, by the time you come to mature Harappa, they have already discovered the alloy called bronze, and they have found out mines from where tin can be extracted, and tin and copper has been mixed to form bronze, and you find bronze implements of varieties of kinds, of which there are nutcrackers, there are swords, there are varieties of ornaments. Recently, in Western UP, we found a Harappan site where a skeleton has been found, and the skeleton on his skull has a kind of a crown made of copper only, small crown, and the whole crown has been found with the skull. So you find that copper continues, but bronze has been introduced. What is most enigmatic, and many people forgot to comment on it, is that such a large urban settlement, such a composite culture, but it doesn't have any or very few weapons of offense and defense. There are very few weapons in offense and defense, and it is enigmatic because such a urban culture must have had reasons for fighting with the invaders, because this lies almost in the mouth of the western and Asiatic land route. And there have been people coming from West Asia into India through these land routes, and they lie on the mouth of the land routes. Mehergarh is on the mouth of Bolan Pass, and Bolan Pass is one of the land routes from Western Asia. So you find that such a culture where you have definitely the possibility of Western invasion coming from the Western side, but very few objects of war and offense and defense have been found. This is particularly important because Sumeria in Egypt, in Iraq, in Sumeria, you find large number of swords, hatchets, you find large number of things of offense and defense, but here you don't find it. So here is a situation which is very interesting to ponder upon. But that there were kind of invasions from the west cannot be denied, because we find a kind of a wall made along the city center. And the wall there is evidence that the wall has been reinforced from time to time. So a kind of a wall along the center shows that they had to defend themselves from Western invasions. Though there is except one situation which kinds of shows that there must have been a Western invasion, there are no other evidences. The one evidence is that we have in the graves of people or on the street sometimes dead skeletons lying in helter-skelter manner as if they have been butchered and so on. But it's very difficult to prove that all through there have been invasions like that. But the fact remains that this wall has been reinforced from time to time. Now this is very interesting. You have evidence, indirect evidence of invasion, yet you have no or very little material of offense and defense. But the amount of material of personal adornment is remarkable. All kinds of chains of lapis lazuli, agate, and various kinds of beads with holes made on them are classical example of having spent much time in art objects of larger value. Now this you find from the citadel only. And it is, I have talked about the site called Aladino near Karachi. Only in the citadel you find the date palm seeds. That means the habit of having taste of sugar or sweetness is a monopoly of the powerful ones. The powerful ones alone can have access to that. The city people will not have the access to it. Now this is a very interesting sociological imperative of archaeological interpretation, and we need to look into it, though the very little attention has been paid to these kind of smaller details, except the Japanese scholars who talked about a stratified society. I come to the city. In the city you find there are many wells dug, and the disposal of dead is very peculiar. Sometimes there is a burial, sometimes the buried part has no skeletons. So you know possibly that they had already gone into cremation system. Sometimes you find that two bodies have been buried together. Sometimes you find that the bodies have been cremated or half cremated or exposed, and the bones collected, and the bones have been put in a jar, and the jar has been kept outside the house in the city. Now, this is a very interesting manner of disposal of the dead. So you expose the body somewhere and then collect the bones and keep the bones along with your domestic unit, wherever it is, in large jars. So you find large variety of systems of disposal of dead in this city center. There's another very interesting thing you find in some of the urban centers. The road is brick laid, and the brick laid roads are always at 90 degrees to each other, like Chandigarh. There are exceptions. For instance, Banawali is a site in Rajasthan where the roads are like Connaught Place, circular. So here, the roads being at angle to each other, if there is a heavily moving or very high speed bullock cart coming, it has a chance of breaking the wall of the building that lies in the corner. And we find trunks of tree has been kept there, a hole has been dug, and trunks of trees have been put there as a buttress against any possible damage that the building can have when the bullock cart is negotiating the corner. So this is very interesting things that shows the level of development of this urban center. It's not to be taken as just a simple urban development like you have in Rome or in Greece. This seems to be 2300 BC, nowhere in the world as such a well-developed urban structure coming, and not one, hundreds of them. Start from Kutch region, you have Dholabira, Kalibanga, Rakhigadi, Banawali, of course Mohenjo-daro, and of course Harappa. So you have Chahanudaro, you have a large number of them. Hundreds of sites of mature Harappa. They seem to have ruled the area. They seem to have a power with them of the surplus, and the surplus they have got from somewhere which is not there in the metropolitan site. I must add one more thing, and this is also enigmatic and nobody has commented on it. This is, if you look at Harappa, or for that matter you look at Kalibanga or Dholabira, you find hundreds and hundreds, truckloads of bovid bones, cow bones. You can't keep so many cows in a place like Connaught Place without having a grazing ground. Where would they graze? There is no grazing ground, and we have no evidence of fodder having brought there for them. Now this is very enigmatic, and we feel somehow that this is a beginning of a currency system. I repeat, a currency system on cow head. Number of cows are counted as a currency. We know it because in Huensang's letter, much later, when Huensang came from China to India to spread Buddhism or to go to Buddhist centers and pilgrimage center, he carried a letter from one king that said, when you pass through that kingdom down south, tell them they still owe us 300 cow heads. And immediately it makes sense that they used to have economic connections and economic exchanges, and the currency was possibly cow heads. Now this is very interesting, and this may possibly explain how so many cows or cow bones are there in these Harappan sites. Nobody has paid much attention to these issues. As I've told you earlier, archaeologists are of two kinds. One is from history department, the other is from anthropology department. The one from history department is too much involved in the technical details of the antiquities. Measure the length, measure the breadth, and talk about the quantities, do the statistics of it. But the people from anthropology department are asked questions. How come so many cows were there? Why were so many cows kept there? In each of the Harappan metropolitan sites, especially the mature Harappan layers of 2700 BC. I come to the last phase. The last phase is called late Harappa or decaying Harappa by some earlier books. Today they are not referred to as late, they are referred to as late Harappan sites. The late Harappan site shows a very peculiar thing. There is a method of abandoning a structure. There are houses which have been abandoned, and there are houses lower below, farther away from the defense wall, where they create smaller houses of their own in a dispersed manner. So this is a period where Harappan economy has collapsed. And it showed the power that the Harappan had to spread over 1 million square kilometer. is now becoming weak, and the power becoming weak means the economy becoming weak. So they are coming down in economy, lowering down in economy. And when some community and some urban center which does not produce its own food, the urban center gets the food from somebody who produces it. That is the rural center. And when the power of economy falls down, the rural center refuses to give you their surplus, then the society collapses. And this collapsing period is the late Harappan period. And the beginning of late Harappan period, around say 1800 to 1600 BC, you find a kind of exodus of the Harappan people towards Haryana in the east, and towards Gujarat in the west, in the south. And Gujarat, even in 2200 BC, they start appearing, they start coming down. So Gujarat start developing again Harappan centers when the main Harappan area has been deserted. So this is a kind of a dying man's last performance of trying to rejuvenate his civilizational details. But by that time, the culture has become, the economy has become weak, because Gujarat is a very dry area. Gujarat doesn't have more than 20 inches rainfall per year. So it is a dry area, and you can't support such a huge population of urban people who are very good in making stone beads, but not good in making food. So you come to Gujarat and look for food from some people, and you find they do not have so much of surplus to give you and to maintain your power of the priest king. So a development of Gujarat archaeological sites like Lothal and Dholabira shows entirely different character. One of the most interesting character of Dholabira, which is not there in Harappa, main Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, is the development of terracotta pipes to take water to the houses. You know perhaps that this Dholabira is a site which is surrounded by saltwater lakes. It's all salt area. It's a Kutch run area, and their sweet water is a more or less impossibility. They have harnessed the sweet water from a small spring, and they have created a kind of terracotta pipes through which this sweet water is taken to every house. And another thing about Dholabira, we have found a big signboard, a huge signboard with Harappan letters on it. And this shows that as if this was kind of an accepted town capital of the people, and they stayed there for more than 600 years. After that, the decay came. Last and not the least about Harappan culture are the seals and the writing on them. The seals have been variedly described as unicorn, Pashupati, and so on and so forth. But these are all imaginative terms you give them. But there are anyway animals shown, and there are also small, minute figures. There is one seal in which there are 7 ladies shown in a row, and that is called Saptamatrika, that comes from Upanishad period. So you have a kind of interpretation of one or the other by way of which you try to explain the seals, but by and large they remain unexplainable to us on empirical ground. Even the script that was found is not deciphered even today. Thank you very much.